Hey guys, welcome to the Smarter Soldiers Showcase video. It's a mod available for Kingdom Rush 1, Frontiers, and Origins, which overhauls the AI for towers, units, and heroes, as well as introducing new gameplay mechanics such as allowing your units to stand off the track. This mod is a quality of life mod for regular players, but it's also a technical showcase to other modders who want to use the tools I created for their own mods. I'll have the code documentation in the Google Drive folder. I should also add a final disclaimer that Smarter Soldiers doesn't aim to be a rebalancing mod at all, since it has the aim of buffing everything as much as possible given the design philosophy. It ends up being easier than vanilla Kingdom Rush, and I see the fact of it being easier as a sign of success in its objective. So why did I make this mod? It's because I've always been bothered by how your soldiers target the foremost enemy regardless of context. I think it's both ludonarratively poor and pretty unfun in a game design sense. For example, I refuse to believe that the arcane wizard would be dumb enough to use their insta-kill on an 80 HP bandit when a 3000 HP magma elemental is standing right behind it, simply because the bandit is a few feet in front. It's wasted potential. And that term, wasted potential, is the term that drives this whole project. So the design philosophy is to draw as much potential out of each individual tower and unit as possible, and only through AI improvements, that which can reasonably be explained by the phrase. They're now smart enough to figure that out. So before anything else, I should introduce some global terms and mechanics. I'll start with targeting. Some terms are very self-explanatory. Target densest and target strongest. For example, I assume anyone can really intuit what they mean. However, I use a few terms that are not as intuitive. Number one is smart archer targeting. That's a targeting system. It prioritizes flying, then magic resistant, then non-resistant, and then lastly armored enemies. Number two is smart mage targeting. It prioritizes armored, then non-resistant, and then lastly magic resistant. Number three is smart true damage targeting. It prioritizes armored, then magic resistant, and then non-resistant. And number four is smart artillery targeting, which is the same as target densest. Given that two enemies have identical priority, then the foremost enemy will be targeted. And unless otherwise specified, any single target attack will have smart targeting based on its damage type. For example, all mage towers have smart mage targeting, and so does Magnus's basic attack. I should also mention that all dragons are now able to fire directly below them, so no more wrestling with their weird-ass valid targeting areas. I don't even know what the hell is going on with that design decision. Okay, next we're going to talk about the new movement and positioning mechanics. All barracks and heroes are now able to rally to any valid terrain, regardless of whether it's on the path or not. This allows your ranged heroes to sit on the sidelines without needing to be moved back and just use their ranged attacks. It also allows for more niche barracks usage, such as if you want your barbarians to be only throwing their axes for a bit without engaging in melee combat, or if you want like your barracks to avoid, I don't know, like a drider. However, some things are a bit weird with terrain validity. You can imagine each level as a grid, and each square in the grid is the terrain type. Ironhide did not make the terrain grid as a one-to-one with the artwork in the level, as they obviously never intended for units to be able to stand off the track. This means that in some levels, there are areas which look like your hero should be able to stand there, but can't. Outside of remaking every single level's grid, the best thing I could think of was this compromise. Since the most useful thing you can do by standing off the track is for having a hero use their ranged attacks, I made it so that any part of the level that's slightly off of the walkable track is valid to rally at, even if the terrain type is invalid. This causes some slightly strange areas to be valid, such as slightly off the side of a bridge, but I think the benefits outweigh the niche moments of weirdness. It's a very technical problem that I don't have the time to really get into, and I can't think of an elegant fix, but I think the compromise I made was pretty okay. Finally, I want to introduce the new soldier AI. Everyone will attempt to survive as long as possible by disengaging with enemies if they're low, but they'll continue to fight to the death to prevent enemies from passing by. How this works is with a pretty simple algorithm. If an ally unit is below half, they're considered low, and when they're low, they check if another ally is fighting the same enemy. If true, the unit will disengage from the fight until they're full and then rejoin. Otherwise, the unit will continue fighting to the death. This algorithm makes relatively no difference when fighting massive swarms of enemies, but it can make the difference when stalling single strong enemies. A unit taking time to regenerate HP while full HP allies take its place means a larger potential health pool for the enemy to fight its way through. And now that we're through with the global changes, we can get into each game. I'm not going to be covering every single change because that would take a really long time, and you can just find that on the change log anyway, so I'm just going to show a few of my personal favorites. Vanilla Rangers already have one of the smartest targeting algorithms with their poison arrows. Each max poison arrow can theoretically do its base physical damage and then 45 poison damage. Their targeting prioritizes poisonable enemies, which is what makes it smart. However, the dumb thing about their targeting is that they continue to shoot at the same enemy until the enemy is poisoned, but they shoot fast enough so that multiple arrows are released before the first arrow even hits the enemy. This makes it so that they're constantly firing 2 to 3 arrows at the same enemy before switching targets when they could be firing 1 arrow per target. In the mod, Ranger's basic attack uses Smart Archer targeting until you upgrade poison arrows. Once you get that, they gain Smart True targeting, and the Rangers will only fire 1 poison arrow at an enemy, and then attempt to switch targets to another poisonable enemy. If there's no poisonable enemies, in that case, they return to just Smart Archer targeting. This algorithm makes it so that when a poisonable enemy is in range, they attempt to affect enemies first with their true damage. However, if no poisonable enemies are in range, they will use the physical damage of their arrows to hit magic resistant and unnumbered targets. Wrath of the Forest is already a hell of a skill in itself, capping off at affecting 8 enemies. Most of the time, that's enough to hit every enemy in range, but in the cases it maxes out, Wrath will prioritize the fastest enemies. That both clusters them with the slower enemies, and it also gets more value based on how far they would have traveled in the time that Wrath stuns them for. Musketeers now have their sniper shot target strongest and their shrapnel shot target densest. There's not much else to it, but these simple changes bring Musketeers from a low B to almost like a straight S tier for me. In this clip you can see Musketeer take out one of the troll chieftains, and then take out basically like 2 all on its own. The Arcane Wizard has always been a worse sorcerer alternative. Now it still is, but just a little less so. Predictably, I made it so that Disintegrate targets strongest, but while Disintegrate is still somewhat of a more expensive polymorph, Teleport now fills a niche that sorcerers are unable to. It now prioritizes the slowest enemies, and since it teleports a fixed distance instead of being based on enemy speed, that gets the most value. And also as a nice heuristic, most strong enemies are slow. Kingdom Rush 1 heroes don't really have that many abilities, so each one has like maybe 1 or 2 changes. But Magnus, Dinas, Thorin, Tenshi, they get smart artillery targeting on their AoE abilities, and I just think it's really satisfying. Dorp's Quadrill now targets strongest. I've always been extremely off-put from buying this skill because it's just an inferior Disintegrate at a higher cost, but this change makes it worth it to me. Necromancers are incredible for choke points, but Vanilla Pestilence targeting has some features that have anti-synergy with choke points. It targets the foremost, and it also spawns ahead of the foremost. I assume the intention is so that the enemy can walk over it for a longer period, but the issue is that since enemies aren't walking forward while fighting in a choke point, it often barely hits anything compared to what it could be hitting. So the Smarter Pestilence has 2 changes to help with that. First, it targets densest, and second, it spawns on the target instead of ahead of the target. I hate the vanilla Archmage AI. When there's no enemies, they play an animation for charging up a new shot to store it, and then they store the shot. simple enough. But when there are enemies in range, they play the same animation, and instead of creating a new shot to shoot along with the stored shots, it shoots only the stored shots. This causes a multitude of issues. Number 1, Archmage already has the highest damage per shot in the game, and if it shoots every single one of its stored shots, it often causes massive overkill, completely wasting the stored shots. Number 2, often the first enemy to enter the Archmage's range will be the fastest one, and the fastest ones are often the weakest ones, further contributing to the overkill damage issue. And number 3, it's just so dumb how it plays the new shot animation, but doesn't actually make a new shot before firing. So, the Archmage got one of the most extensive AI overhauls. The Archmage will no longer fire every stored shot at the very first enemy in range. Instead, it now fires a regular shot along with one stored shot. This prevents the often insane levels of wasted damage that the vanilla Archmage suffers from. Mirage is infamously one of the worst heroes in the series, although compared to Illyria, she has way more potential to be extracted. Her lethal strike is actually a ranged attack that, in vanilla, prioritizes the enemy she's currently fighting, but otherwise it targets a random enemy in range. And that's horrible, so now it targets strongest. Second, her Shadow Dance now gets smart true damage targeting. That does true damage, by the way. I didn't know that till I started working on the mod. Blackthorn's already pretty strong in vanilla, but a lot of his strength is in his money generation and not his actual abilities as a combatant. These changes that I made aim to buff both his money generation and combative abilities. So, first, his melee range has been reduced by more than half in order to maximize his ability to heal but still be in range for looting. In vanilla, Rum and Bang and Release the Kraken's minimum ranges caused a lot of really weird targeting, so now the minimum range is removed. They also now both target densest. Flying heroes are typically really strong. However, Ashbite was probably created before they decided to make that a rule. He's definitely the worst flying hero in the series, and it's not even close. A lot of it stems from just his numbers being piss poor. His Blazing Breath, for example, barely does more damage than his basic attack, and his smoke does 0 damage. However, Ashbite can benefit a lot from AI improvements. As a reminder, all dragons are able to now fire directly below them. Now his basic attack, Blazing Breath, Fiery Mist, and Wildfire Barrage all target densest. Feast now targets strongest. And can I just complain about Vanilla Feast for a second? It's so bad. It does 7 damage per second, with only a 40% insta-kill chance on a 30-second cooldown. That's on average 1 insta-kill per 75 seconds. It's, oh my god. At least it now targets strongest. Forest Keepers got one of my personal favorite changes, which is that their Circle of Life healing can now activate if any nearby ally is below half health. In vanilla, it could only be triggered if the Forest Keepers themselves were below 80%. This change makes them available as a backline healer for your heroes, reinforcements, and other barracks. So now heroes like Bruce that have terrible heal rates can have that heavily mitigated by Forest Keepers assisting them. What's also kind of cool is that their spears start with smart archer targeting, because they start by doing physical damage, but when you upgrade them, they do true damage, so then they change to the smart true damage targeting. The High Elven Mage is a really weird tower to try and improve. Their sentinels are pretty simple. I just gave them smart mage targeting. That should theoretically increase their DPS. But Timelapse had a lot of iterations before I felt like I had something that was right. Initially, I had to target strongest, because that would theoretically relieve the most pressure from your defense. However, what it actually seemed to do in practice was make the strongest enemies untargetable by my other towers, while Timelapse's damage only tickled them for like the 4 seconds that they are affected. But on the other hand, if I were to make it target weakest, it would waste what damage Timelapse does do, and Timelapse can't even kill enemies anyway, so it would just drop in these like 1 HP bozos that you don't have to deal with. So this guy named Orb gave what I think is a really good idea. Timelapse now prioritizes weakest enemies, but only starting from those who can actually take the full Timelapse damage. This makes it so that very low enemies won't waste the Timelapse damage, but also most of the time, it'll still allow your towers to target the high HP enemies. Wild Magus' basic attack does more damage the more it shoots at the same enemy, so now it locks on to an enemy with Smart Mage targeting priority, unless a higher priority target enters her range. For example, the Magus initially locks on to a magic resistant enemy, she's gonna immediately change targets if an armored or non-resistant enemy enters her range. Also, Eldritch Doom targets strongest for obvious reasons. The Archdruid Henge is really down there with the High Elven Mage as one of the weakest towers in the series, I think. But I also think that the changes that I gave it bring it up to at least about average. First, it attacks similarly to Archmage, where it charges a new shot and then fires a stored shot at the same time. Charged shots will also cluster slightly tighter. The Sylvan Curse now requires at least 2 enemies at range to activate, and it targets the strongest. Aravan is probably one of the heroes who benefits the most from having smarter AI. His basic attack does true damage, so it gets the smart true damage targeting. His fireballs target densest, his lightning rod targets strongest, and also has the new HP requirement of 75% of its average damage. And despite doing magic damage, his icy prison targets strongest on account of his stun typically being more useful on stronger enemies. Katha gets a pretty whimsical change, which is probably in line with her character. Her Pixie Fury has Smart Mage targeting, but that's not the whimsical thing. That's the fact that she can now move anywhere, since she flies. I know that's kind of totally against the mod's goal of not changing the inherent properties of anything, but it just makes so much sense. She's now smart enough to figure out that she can fly over obstacles. Hey, I want to thank anyone who made it here for watching my showcase. I worked really hard on my mod over the course of, 3 weeks to a month-ish. I'd also like to shout out Voduk's Archives. That's the Discord server of Voduk. He's a Kingdom Rush YouTuber. Because they helped me a lot with starting out modding, because I never modded Kingdom Rush before. Also, sorry for my voice. I've been sick for the past, 6 days. I don't have a script for this outro. So, I don't know what to say. I guess I just hope you have a lot of fun with my mod. See ya.